All right, so I am here with Dr. Leah Howard. We are doing a Q&A about her preceptorial that she presented during New Student Orientation, titled Contemplative Social Contemplative Social Movements. So hello, Leah, thank you for joining me.
Oh, such a pleasure, Caitlin. So glad to be here.
Okay, so we can just jump right in. So we would love to hear how you came up with the idea for this preceptorial.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. This is great to talk about. So contemplative social movements, to be quite honest, this past summer, starting with the killing of George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter movement and all of the different protests peaceful protests that mobilized around the city of Philadelphia and all over the country and even the world, made me think a lot about past social movements, whether it was the civil rights movement or the movement around freedom and liberation in India, or different economic movements headed up by Dorothy Day or Cesar Chavez. It made me look back at think about these past movements and think about what was motivating those moments and how this moment, what was similar about this moment, what's different about this moment. And so in looking at those other movements, I thought there's some things we could learn, just perspective we could gain from these past moments that could speak to today. And many times in the news, they actively compared, for example, what was happening in Philadelphia with Black Lives Matter and the different peaceful protests with the civil rights movement. And to be honest, there was more mobilization in Philadelphia, like one of the largest protests, maybe the largest protest that Philadelphia has ever seen. So media was doing it a bit already, but it made me really think about what are the values and things that animate that period and animate today.
Yeah, it is very interesting to kind of compare past social movements with what's going on today. So yeah, I attended and it was a very great experience. So very educational, but like you said, I think in the preceptorial, it could be something that could be like a full-on class. So
thank you, I agree.
Yeah. Okay, so you mentioned the First Amendment in the preceptorial. You outlined that people usually reference the First Amendment just as freedom of speech, but don't point out the second half of the amendment, which is the right to, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. So why do you think that the first part of the amendment gets more attention than the second part?
Yeah, it's a really great question. For some reason, I think because the press calls it out more, so freedom of speech and freedom of the press, those parts of the amendment are talked about a lot. To be honest, the very first line of the First Amendment concerning that we don't have an established religion and there's free exercise, those two clauses aren't talked about as much as they should, because we do not in our country have an established religion, and that should be discussed, I think, more than it is. But also, as you mentioned in this good question, we do not talk enough about the last part of the amendment, right? This idea of the right of the people to peaceably assemble and to petition the government for redress of grievance. And when people don't know that that is written into the Constitution, they think it can be spun, by this current administration or news as what's going on is wrong, that the fact that people would protest that's that kind of disruption is wrong, and when in actuality it's written into the very fabric of our nation. And so I teach Introduction to American Politics, and one of the things I do is I talk about, when we discuss the Constitution, the very original debate between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists, and everyone's yawning a bit, but just the Federalists, right? They wanted a constitution. They wanted this national constitution, and they won. So we hear their side of the story always. But the Anti-Federalists, their voice is still very important, and their voice is what's reflected in the Bill of Rights, of which the First Amendment is the first in the Bill of Rights. And their fear, the Anti-Federalists' biggest fear, was that the national government would grow too strong and that the states and the localities and the rights of the individual would be overshadowed by a very large national government. And so basically they get written into the Constitution in this First Amendment. And what's really important is the First Amendment encapsulates some of their greatest fears that government would not allow for these types of things. And it provides for, again, there's the first few lines is that Congress shall make no law. So Congress is not allowed to squelch the rights of individuals to freely exercise their religion. Of course, it's interpreted in many ways throughout case law, but to squelch any of these other things. And so you can think back to, the Boston Tea Party or all these other moments of disruption, and that is very much in the fiber. The anti-authorityness of our First Amendment is very much American and very much the way we see ourselves, is how we balance individual rights and liberties with kind of a national government. And so whenever I see or hear the press or, again, government itself casting dispersion on people peaceably protesting, I get a little nervous, and I want to make sure that people know the full First Amendment, not as how it's typically thought of as solely freedom of speech and the press, but also these other very important components of it.
Yeah, I definitely think it's important for people to remember that, especially when the media right now is maybe misrepresenting what's going on with the protests, and kind of muddling it with maybe some of the more violent instances or expressions of pain. And so yeah, I appreciated that you brought that up, that it is written into the fiber of our country. Mm-hmm. And if people are really going to be focused on that, the constitutional rights, that they need to remember that as well. So thank you for bringing that up.
Oh, thank you. That's great. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's patriotic, right? And to be, to protest. That bumper sticker is right on because it's in our Constitution.
Yeah, definitely. So can you walk us through contemplative practice? In the preceptorial, you connect contemplative practices with social movements seamlessly. And so can you kind of reiterate that connection there and why it's important?
Oh, of course. Yes. So social wellness is something, it's part of my job title. And so I've been thinking a lot more about it. And it's something that could not be needed more. Again, we're facing this current moment of political protest in a pandemic. And so we've been thinking a lot about wellness in terms of our physical wellness, staying safe and social distancing, all very good things and very important. But we need to be paying equal attention to our mental and our social health. And our mental health requires so many different things in the age of Zoom meetings and not being around people and not being able to do the regular routines of kind of the things that give you joy and peace and health, and not being able to relax with people as much. There's all these new things that this particular moment brings up. And so I think focusing on ways to bring integration. So what I tried to emphasize in the preceptorial is the importance of integration, meaning that our personal health, our individual health, and the health of the community are connected. This is an important part of the Paideia initiative, is seeing with both eyes that how the individual is doing and how the community is doing, there's a connection there. And so contemplative practice built into social wellness is something that I think we as a culture need to be thinking about more. And I throughout the preceptorial, we did several contemplative practices. We did a deep breathing exercise. We did something called beholding, or in other traditions, it's called visio divina, or holy seeing, where we looked at a painting and talked about perspective. And then we ended with some reflection, which is also very important for wellness and writing. But the reason why I think it's so important is that when we just do like a social movement, when we just do social justice without time to reflect or spend time on wellness, or we actually become disintegrated. Our mind and our heart don't get a chance to knit themselves together. And that can, we already are facing disintegration right now. I mean, it's disintegrating in many ways to kind of see people on a screen and not spend enough time with other people. We need to go out of our way to do things that are wellness oriented and bring us back together, put the pieces back together. And that this is one. And so part of this, and this question's going on and on, but looking at the past social movements and looking at people like Gandhi and Martin Luther King, Dorothy Day, Cesar Chavez, which were the people we focused on in the preceptorial, those folks had a deep sense of that. They had values and they had practices, like their own contemplative practices that they brought to their work, and they actively were integrating themselves in wellness ways. I read from a book about Martin Luther King. I read about his fears, this moment that he talked about with his biographers about deep fear he was having about, he was getting bomb threats and people were shooting his house and all sorts of really scary things. And he spent a time of deep prayer, and he audibly heard something that gave him the courage to do the social movement he was going to do the next day, to lead that march, to do that next protest sit-in and be jailed. And so that moment of contemplation gave him the vision, the passion, the strength to do the next thing. And I think we can get burnt out if we spend too much time doing external things for the community and not focusing a little bit on the inside. So I think they were both deeply at play, because I also think Martin Luther King's values, spurred him to get involved in the first place. So the internal spoke to the external, but the external can benefit from the internal. So.
Great, thank you. That was a very thoughtful response. And I think it does touch on the point that you made earlier, is that, we have to see with both eyes and really check in externally and internally to make sure that we're doing the right thing for not only ourselves, but for everyone. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So we kind of touched on this, but maybe we can dive into it a little deeper. So we are seeing mass protests across the United States right now in the Black Lives Matter movement. So why is contemplative social practice relevant to this moment right now?
Yeah, I mean, and I don't want to completely reiterate my last answer, but I think it's worth saying again that because we're in a pandemic, there are new challenges that past movements didn't face. And the new challenge, right, is we have social distancing, but we also are all at home. And so in a way, we all were tuned in to this moment in ways that, Black Lives Matter has been going on since Trayvon Martin's killing, which was, 2015, that moment. But yet it hasn't had the mass mobilization, especially around white America, that it's had in this moment. And so I think the fact that we are all at home has given more passion and it's mobilized more people. So this moment is very unique in that way. Because Paideia is Greek, I'll say this, but the word apocalypse, which many people have been talking about, is going on right now with the fires and the storms and this horrible COVID-19. It means an uncovering or a revealing in Greek. There's all sorts of great meanings for that word, but an uncovering or a revealing. And so what it's done is it's uncovered and revealed some of the deep structural inequities like racism, structural racism, economic inequities, other things. It's kind of, you can't ignore them right now. They're all on the table and we're all experiencing them. And so I think right now, contemplative practice becomes even more important at the same time, because we feel so raw and it feels so uncomfortable and we feel so maybe isolated or angry. The current divisive political moment is not helping. We hear messaging that is deeply harmful. and to the person and to our hearts. And so again, we could not need integration more than we do right now. And so to kind of marry the desire for social change with this moment to integrate, reflect, breathe, work inside a little bit. There could not be a more, a drum roll moment that says we need to do this more than now, I think. So.
Yeah, I think it's important to take a step back and check in with yourself, especially when you're participating in something that is so emotionally charged. If you're not good with yourself, if you're not good emotionally, you're not going to really do anything productive or helpful for that movement. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. And you think about, we also lost John Lewis, right? Representative
Mm-hmm.
John Lewis several months ago, devastating loss, but it caused us to look at his life. And this is a man who was, harmed his head, his skull was bashed. I mean, he was so battered by others, yet he remained nonviolent. And I think his example is so deeply important because he clearly had a deeply integrated sense of self that he could be in a nonviolent social movement, even when other people are attacking him. And so I don't think that you can respond well to other people hitting your body unless you yourself have been deeply integrated and spent some time in contemplation and with your values.
Definitely. Okay, so what would be your advice for someone interested in participating in a social movement right now?
Well, again, I think there's a lot of, we have a wealth of people, heroes to look back on. And I think right now, just because of this moment being so hard, sometimes it's hard to find individuals right in this moment to look to. But looking back, you can really read about people's lives and be inspired. So, and I think, to be honest, I heard this on a recent podcast. It was Ezra Klein speaking to Ta-Nehisi Coates, and he was saying that actually spending time to read about nonviolence as a philosophical concept is so striking right now because it's so it speaks to the moments. Your initial impulse might be to be angry and to lash out, but reading about nonviolence and this strategy that it's worked in so many different circumstances that seemed totally intractable, like the British leaving India or, Jim Crow leaving the South, these things that seemed impossible. Individuals that really practice this, again, deeply integrated and contemplative type of approach to social movements, it works. And so I think I would ask people to spend some time reading and being inspired, knowing the roots of social movements and also the roots of contemplation as it relates to social movements. And then, discovering social contemplation as well, like spending some time finding a wellness practice that really works for you, whether it's spending time in nature or, journaling or breathing deeply or something that really resonates, and getting into it in a contemplative way, spending time apart and present and mindful. And then finally, to do it, to be brave and participate in a social movement and make a sign and go out there, because there's something that you can't teach about. You have to experience when it comes to social movements. I can tell you, you'll feel united to the person next to you in a way you never have before. You'll experience all sorts of feelings, but it'll mean nothing if I say it. You have to actually experience it to know what that's like.
That's great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So my final question, what would you like students and other viewers to take away from this preceptorial?
I think I want students to know just that key part of the Paideia program that I mentioned earlier, that individual wellness and our collective wellness, community wellness are connected. And I think in our nation, the United States in particular, we have a strong individualistic push right now. It's an ideal that, is not bad, but it's an ideal that gets a lot of play right now. And so we don't always think about ourselves as members of communities, but that connection is real. I'm writing a wellness post right now about with a quote from Rumi that I'll just read right now. It says, "Yesterday I was clever, so I wanted to change the world. Today I am wise, so I'm changing myself." And Rumi gets at that idea in that quote that individual and community wellness are not only connected, but there's some work you need to do inside before you can change the world. And that is not to minimize the impulse to change the world. I think that is one of the most exciting parts about being a human, is to read something that inspires you and then to want to go out and change it, or to not know about inequity and then to read something and to want to change that awful inequity. But you will not be as effective unless you're doing some work inside first. And it seems counterintuitive. It seems to change the world. You just run out your front door and do it. But to take a step back and say, maybe there's something in here I need to do first that will make that running out the door, changing the world, a little bit more effective.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Leah. This has been really informative, and I hope that people watch the preceptorial because I attended and it was very well done. So.
Oh, Caitlin, thank you for your excellent questions and for this good time together and for coming to the preceptorial. It was such a good thing. Thank you.